This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio!
And this week's programme is a selection of thoughts, true stories, some of them local, and music for this Remembrance Sunday. Wallingford Parish Church Choir with the hymn I Vow to Thee My Country, all earthly things above, entire and whole and perfect the service of my love.
Haji Godson de ve shan, moni shingen te maren chit de ve shan. Hajin eish denas, nyn y blienten dera a chororu. Eg lain y grenia, as on savora, niemaj kunyan oru.
On this Remembrance Day, we come in gratitude for all who have died so that we may live, for all who endured pain so that we might know joy, for all who suffered imprisonment so that we might know freedom. Turn our deep feelings now into determination, and our determination into deed, so that, as people died for peace, we may live for peace, and work tirelessly to bring into our world the kingdom values of justice and peace for all God's people.
It's been said that truly great people forget themselves. That's why they're remembered. During the Second World War, a Russian Orthodox nun, Mother Maria, was imprisoned by the Nazis for helping the Jews. One day she saw a woman being led towards the gas chamber. She was crying hysterically, so Mother Maria put her arm around her and told her not to be frightened, that she would come into the gas chamber with her. Mother Maria died cradling that woman in her arms. Most of us are unlikely ever to be famous, but there is a kind of greatness we can all achieve, being remembered by others for forgetting ourselves.
Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there's doubt, true faith in you. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy. Oh, Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, in giving to all men that we receive, and in dying that we're born to eternal life. Oh, Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy. And where there's sadness, ever joy.
Catherine Jenkins with the musical setting of the Prayer of St. Francis, Make Me a Channel of Your Peace. We need facts if we're to understand any situation, but I think it's personal stories, the experiences of people just like us, that touch us most deeply and live on in our memory. We're joined now by Reverend David and Jacqueline Shirtliff to share stories of real people whose everyday lives were changed forever by their experiences in the 2 world wars.
Sergeant Jack Dorgan, 7th Battalion, the Northumberland Fusiliers. Private Bob Young was conscious right to the last. I lay alongside of him and said, "Can I do anything for you, Bob?" He said, "Straighten my legs, Jack." But he had no legs. I touched the bones and that satisfied him. Then he said, "Get my wife's photograph out of my breast pocket." I took the photograph and put it in his hands. He couldn't move. He couldn't lift a hand. He couldn't lift a finger. But somehow he held his wife's photo on his chest. And that is how Bob Young died. Private W. Underwood, 1st Canadian Division. I was given 7 days number 1 field punishment, which consists of being tied on a wagon wheel. You're spread-eagled with the hub of the wheel in your back, and your legs and wrists handcuffed to the wheel. You'd do 2 hours up and 4 hours down for 7 days, day and night, and the cold. It was January 1915, a really cold month, and when they took you down they had to rub you to get the circulation going in your limbs again. And the only reason I was there was because I missed a roll call.
Kitty Eckersley. When I found out that I was pregnant, I went to see them at the leather works, and they said they would find me some light work. So I had a very nice job and worked there until I was 7 months pregnant. I didn't go out much because I had a very bad time during my pregnancy. I was very thin at the time. My mother had a little job picking strawberries at a jam factory, so there was only me in the house when I heard the postman come. I knew there would be a letter for me, so I ran down in my nightdress and opened the door, snatched the letter off him and ran in and shut the door again. I opened the letter and saw it was from his sergeant. It just said, "I'm very sorry to tell you of the death of your husband." Well, that was as far as I could read. I don't really know what happened over the next few minutes, but I must have run out of my house just as I was, in my bare feet, and banged on the next door. They brought some blankets and wrapped me up in them and sent for my mother, so she came home and treated me for shock. The letter was only from his sergeant, so I thought perhaps it was an error. So later on I wrote back to the sergeant, but I had another letter to say that he also had been killed. Then, later on, I got the official news. The tailor. I was only 21 and recently married when the war started. My husband was drafted into the tank regiment a few months after we were married, and I spent the war years making Army, Naval and Air Force uniforms. I lived 5 minutes away from the nearest air raid shelter. As soon as the sirens rang out, I would wrap up blankets, pillow and food and run as fast as I could to the shelter. Everyone shared their food and drink and sang, and as soon as the sirens rang out again with the all clear, we would all go home. My family suffered as many others in different countries all over the world. I had 8 fit brothers at the start of the war. At the end, 1 was killed in Burma. 1 lost an eye when a Bren gun backfired. 1 lost his hearing when a horse kicked him in the head. And 1 was invalided out when his wife committed suicide by throwing herself out of the bedroom window. The war was a time of sorrow, but great comradeship existed, and everyone shared what they had. The daughter. It starts with my grandfather, who lost his arm in World War I and his son in World War II. He was my father figure and a constant reminder of war and its effects upon people and families. He always said that losing his arm was the best thing that happened to him. He was invalided out of the army, was able to set up his own market stall and eventually a small shop before the flood of men came looking for jobs in 1918. And he always had his pension to supplement his income. In the end, though, it was having no arm that killed him. He missed his footing and fell from a bus. So I was aware of the effects of war, even before I was old enough to know that my own father had died at Arnhem, when in September 1944 he was shot down and his parachute didn't open. I was born in January 1945. My mother did not have the confirmation of my father's death until VE Day, the 8th of May 1945, as everyone else celebrated. Her loss was proved. My grandfather, he never attended church after World War II and never spoke to me about his beliefs. The effects of war are still present in our family.
Thank you to Reverend David and Jacqueline Shirtliff, who read stories taken from Beyond Our Tears, edited by Jean Mayland. In 1998, David Collister produced and presented a special programme to mark the 60th anniversary of the formation of the Manx Regiment. These extracts give us an idea of their involvement in the Second World War.
Cairo, Eritrea, Crete, Suez, Tobruk, El Alamein, Tunis, Salerno, the beaches of Normandy and into Germany, theatres of war for the 15th Isle of Man Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment Royal Artillery, the Manx Regiment. The last colonel commanding the regiment is Brian Mulchrist, who became one of the first officers in August 1938.
I really do believe that the story of the Manx Regiment, which served its great distinction throughout the Second World War, may very well take a proud place in the military history of the Isle of Man. In the 1930s, we were faced with the threat of a European and ultimately a world war, and of course Britain was rearming rapidly to face this threat, and the Isle of Man was asked to form a regiment of light anti-aircraft artillery in the early part of 1938. That's how we started. The first establishment was for a regimental headquarters and 2 batteries, and this was to amount to 16 officers and 310 other ranks, and they specified that they should be between the ages of 18 to 38. We were very fortunate here on the island to have a most distinguished retired colonel, Lieutenant Colonel G.P. McClellan, who had been amazingly in the Boer War and in the Great War, and here at the age of 56 he was asked to form the Manx Regiment. The recruiting started more or less straight away, and by the time we got to the 6th of September, the first drill night, we had 6 officers and 39 other ranks present, and everything was going well. The early characters of the regiment included Captain Clive Simpson, who was the adjutant. We had as M.O. Captain Harry Corrigal. The RSM was Bill Ramble, that many will remember, and we had 2 sergeant instructors, Dowie Baker and Sergeant Rogers. About the same time, as a matter of fact, we also formed an ATS company of girls, believe it or not, and Mrs. Lionel Woods was appointed the officer commanding, and we had 25 girls. So the regiment really went from strength to strength, and by the time we got to May 39, we were practically up to full strength.
The regiment then will have had something like a year of preparation, so when did you get off to war?
On the 24th of August 1939, the regiment were mobilised because the war was going to start any minute. Now, this was a week before war was declared, and during the day of the 24th, the message came over and was sent all around the island, and there were members of the regiment who were working all over the island, some were farmers or whatever, and they were told to go home immediately, get their kit and go down to the drill hall on the 24th of August. And from the drill hall, they were marched down to the steam packet boat Fenella, and they stayed on the ship overnight. And the following morning, we sailed off to war, and that's how it all started.
And that was just the beginning of so much travelling and enemy engagement that lay ahead for the regiment. But it was in the spring of 1942 in the Western Desert that the Manx Regiment lost their much-respected founding officer. A more senior officer considered that Lieutenant Colonel G.P. McClelland was just too old for active service.
This general looked at Colonel McClellan, and he noticed that he had 3 rows of very interesting war ribbons. And he said to Colonel Mack, he said, Colonel, isn't that the Boer War medal that you've got on your chest? And Colonel Mack, very proud of this, said, well, it is actually. And I could see this general going through his mind, this fellow shouldn't be here at all. And sure enough, within a couple of weeks, Colonel Mack was ordered to hand over and go home, and he was replaced by Colonel Thomas Eustace Smith, who was a Northumberland hussar. Anyway, he took over, and that was a very sad moment, really.
I found him a very efficient officer, very interested in the men, and particularly after any action, he would be there to see what went on and how everybody was.
Yes, his mind was on the men all the time and how things were at home and one thing and another. He was very interested, and you could approach him on any matter at any time. He was a thorough gentleman.
This was Colonel McClellan's advice to Henry Kelly as a battery commander under fire.
The first thing is, if you hear a shell coming towards you, he says you needn't worry. There's no point in ducking, because by the time you hear it, it's already past you. And he said, so you just stand where you are. And he said, in the morning, if you duck for the first shell you hear, screaming towards you, he said, you'll be ducking all day. And he said, you'll be worn out after an hour or two. So he said, you just stand, because he said, the shell may be aimed at your head or it may be aimed at your feet. You just take your chance. If it's aimed at your feet and you're lying flat on the ground, it'll get you. And the other thing he said, it'll be your duty as a battery commander to go around your guns during action and give them moral support. And if you, under shell fire, you start running from one gun to another, you'll get out of breath and you might start panicking. So the only thing to do is just to walk slowly from one gun to the other, because it might be in front of you and might be behind you.
So that was a flavour of what happened to the Manx Regiment in the Second World War. But what about the statistics? Brian Mulcreast?
Well, David, I think really to sum it all up, the first thing I would recommend you to do is to look at our war memorial. And on that memorial you will see that over 80 members of this regiment lost their lives during the Second World War. Also on the memorial is the list of all the countries in which we served. So it was a very big operation for this Manx regiment. In addition to those killed, we had over 150 who were wounded in some way and, patched themselves up and got back. During the whole of the war, the regiment shot down in excess of 250 enemy aircraft. Now, that's quite something for a light attack regiment. Also, we had 2 officers who were awarded the Military Cross. Several members were awarded the Military Medal. We had 1 or 2 officers got the French Croix de Guerre, and many members were mentioned in dispatches for gallantry. Now, that sums up, I think, a pretty remarkable effort for this regiment. And I think, David, I would like to finish by saying that the Manx Regiment was certainly one of the most outstanding light anti-aircraft regiments of the Second World War. And all of us who served in this regiment were greatly privileged to have been with such outstanding comrades and very good friends.
There will be services in churches today and at 11 a.m. at war memorials all around the island, where everyone wishing to mark this very poignant day will be made most welcome. Or stay with us here on Manx Radio for our special Remembrance Sunday programming that's still to come. No big notice board today, just a reminder that the Mariners Choir will be in St John's Methodist Church tonight at 6:30, where Reverend Joe Smart will preach with a warm welcome for everyone. Also this evening, there'll be another bilingual Manx and English language service in Ballabeg Methodist Church. That's tonight at 6:30 with Reverend Janet Corlett, and Manx and English music too. And the theme, very appropriate for this season of remembrance, is peace. And that's all that we have time for now, but I'll be back later with Sundown, a warm welcome to our virtual lounge tonight from 9 o'clock onwards, where I'll have a full notice board of events happening around the island during the coming week and next weekend, as well as our usual mix of easy listening music and your requests and dedications, and I'd love you to join me if you can. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you very much for listening, and I wish you and those you love a blessed and peaceful week and a very good morning.
The nation stays.